I guess, really, to be fair, it's not just therapists who have doubts about the efficacy of counseling and psychotherapy, coaching. Actually, it's the consumers as well. They've done surveys, the American Psychological Association, the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, where they've asked potential consumers of psychological services whether or not it works. And a staggering percentage have doubt about the efficacy of treatment. It's really strange when you compare these types of reactions to what the research literature actually says about our work. What does it say? And I'll say this twice, the average treated client is better off than 80% of the untreated sample in most studies. Let me say that again. Regardless of problem and regardless of the treatment that's used, the average treated person is better off than 80% of the untreated people in most studies. Now, I want you to note what I did not say. I did not say that we were successful with 80% of the people we treated. Imagine a room all full of people with the same issue or concern. The one person in that room who gets care provided by one of you is going to be better off than 80% of those people in that room who did not get help. Take a moment, think about that. It's a staggering effect size. In fact, compared to medicine, our effect size are either equal or better. And interestingly enough, our side effect profile is a lot more tolerable. We kill very few people. It's amazing. And if there were an ad on TV for the work that all of you do, there wouldn't have to be a little caveat at the end that said, may cause diarrhea, dry mouth, your hair to fall out, or death, or worse yet, an erection lasting 4 hours. You wouldn't have to do that because what you do works, and the usual side effect is long-term happiness. So just how effective is the kind of service you provide compared to medicine? Well, the effectiveness is equal to coronary artery bypass surgery. It is 4 times the effect of fluoride in the prevention of dental caries. And it is 27 times greater than the prophylactic effects of aspirin in the treatment of heart disease. Let that sink in. It's an amazing effect size. That's one of those statistical terms. What actually does that mean? Well, without getting too worried, what it is a standardized way to report change. Think back to your stats course in high school or college. Generally, there are many things that are distributed on a normal basis, on a normal curve, so to speak. For example, height. Average male height, if you think of that normal curve, average male height is 5 foot 9.5 inches in the US. There are some very tall people at the end of that curve, and there are some very short people at the opposite end. But most people cluster around the mean. And statisticians also divide that curve into equidistant points called a standard deviation. Now, don't fret too much about that. The cool part is that if you look at the outcomes of any treatment that's been tested, as I said, with any particular issue or concern that's been tested, the average treated person is 0.8 to 1.2 standard deviations above the mean. The distance between the mean and the first standard deviation is about 30%. About 30% of the cases on the normal curve fall between that mean and standard deviation. Where do we get that 80% figure from? You add all the numbers together below that one standard deviation point. 30 plus 50 that fall below the mean is about 80. The average treated client is better off than 80% of the untreated sample. What all this technical language really says is coaching, psychotherapy, talking with another person with the intent to help them really does work. So if treatment works, then you may be wondering at this point, why am I inundated with paperwork, oversight procedures, all of this mess about showing that I'm an accountable practitioner? Well, it's true, treatment really does work. And in fact, there's been an explosive growth both in access to services, as well as the number of treatment approaches. Right now, a conservative count by former president of the American Psychological Association, Alan Kasdan, was that we had 400 different treatment models. In the field of coaching, if you're doing that kind of work, you've already noticed that the approaches to coaching has also similarly exploded. All well and good. Treatment works, the care you provide does work, but there are three persistent problems that feedback-informed clinical work are designed to solve. Number one is that we have a 47%, this is an average, 47% dropout rate. Let that sink in for a minute. Another way of saying this is, we do great work with the people who stay. But half of our customers decide early on, I'd rather be mentally ill than be forced to speak with you one more time. It's a sad sign, really. And the second piece makes it worse, and that is we clinicians don't seem to notice when clients are at risk for dropping out. Worse still, we don't detect when clients are deteriorating in our care. Don't trust me about this? Look at the research. Hannon did a study not so many years ago where he had over 500 clients. All he asked the therapist to do was identify those clients on your caseload that are actually getting worse. Therapists in that particular study were told the average deterioration rate, which is about 10%. That's a number that goes back 2.5 decades. In that particular sample, the deterioration rate was about 8%. So around 40 clients were measurably worse off at the end of services than they were at the beginning of services. Of those 40, the treaters in the sample identified one deteriorating case successfully. Clearly, we need help in this particular area. We just don't see it coming. Last but not least, you may be dealing with a waiting list at your particular agency. Where do these waiting lists come from? The usual answer is too many clients, too few providers. The truth may be something more complicated. Here's what seems to happen. Cases that we meet with that do not change stay with us, perhaps in the hope that we'll eventually be able to help them. A certain percentage of them, about 1 out of 10 actually, stay the course. Those clients collect like plaque on the arteries of the treatment system. They don't go away. In fact, that 1 out of 10 clients that we don't help or that deteriorates ends up accounting for 60 to 70% of the expenditures in behavioral health system. In other words, a small percentage of clients account for the largest amount of expenditures. Why? Because we keep working with them despite our not helping them. Just so you don't feel bad, the same is true in the field of medicine, where a very small percentage of people account for the bulk of expenses in the healthcare system. Unless we address that problem, the queues, the waiting lists will never go away, and we'll really never get a handle on healthcare costs. All right, if you're not feeling discouraged enough, let me give you one more piece of bad news. And that is that while our outcomes as a field are really very good, they haven't improved over the last 35 some odd years. First studies to take a look at the overall outcomes of talk therapies were Smith and Glass back in the mid-1970s. Every so often a study is published looking at the overall outcomes of our field, and what do they find? They're about the same as they were the year before. When I ask therapists to explain this, they will often say, well, we're working with many more complicated, complex, and disturbed people. And yet, the particular studies done now actually take that into account. The truth of the matter is, our outcomes are good, but they've remained relatively flat over time. So the question is, why? Why? Well, let me offer one more thing, and that is that the outcomes of individual therapists, once they finish school, they don't improve over the course of their careers. That's a sad finding when you think about it, especially when so many of us put so much into keeping our skills current. We attend workshops, we read books, we try. And yet the data say that over time, clinicians' outcomes not only don't improve, they actually begin a slow deterioration. This isn't just true of the therapy world or the coaching world. This is true of all professions. If you don't work at it, you lose it. Combine that with one last particular finding. a study that was done by Wallfish and a group of colleagues where they surveyed a representative sample of clinicians all over in fact, in all of the states in the United States, psychiatrists, psychologists, marriage and family therapists, and they simply asked them, how effective do you think you are compared to your peers? Well, here's a frightening finding. The average therapist rated their effectiveness at the 80th percentile. Now, let that sink in for a minute. What that means is that all therapists thought that they were better than 80% of their peers, something which is statistically impossible. This is Lake Wobegon on stimulant drugs. It really is. Everybody thinks they are wonderful. Look in the mirror and think, damn, my clients are lucky. Here comes an exercise. Now, before the exercise takes place, let me just tell you a little story about my son, Michael. Like a lot of kids his age, he loved Dora the Explorer, the television show. And he liked that show for about 3 weeks. And here's what happened. He found out that when Dora said, do this, think about this, try this, help us out, the television program went on whether he answered or not. In a way, that will happen with this particular exercise as well. I'm encouraging you, don't do a Dora the Explorer. Take a moment, stop, think about this particular exercise and the questions you're about to be asked about both your successful and unsuccessful work. Doing so will help the computer and you create a profile, an awareness about your use of feedback to improve and inform your work.